Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Badawi. Many of you have received many emails from me, so thanks for your patience and for following up and checking in. It's great to be on here finally with all of you. We just want to all say a very special thank you to you for taking the time to participate in this webinar, especially at this point in the school year, and give a shout out to teachers who are online with us from Kentucky and West Virginia and other states where we know teachers are working extra hard on all kinds of ways of advocating for their students. So, so thank you, all of you, for being here, and we're really excited to get started.
Hi, so I'm Carrie Doggett, and I'm going to kick it off here today. This is all about using, teaching about current events, and probably goes unsaid, but why do we teach about current events? A couple of things that come to mind for me are really relevancy for the students. It can really increase their desire to dig into a reading, to dig into a discussion, to come prepared to a discussion, to do really good writing. And it also presents an opportunity to really help students develop evidence-based arguments and informed opinions, which I know is something in many of our state standards that is pretty key these days. So we want to introduce you all to a couple of things. Ways that you can use role play and simulation to really teach about current events in an effective way. The rationale being, first and foremost, when you deal with current events, oftentimes we're dealing with controversial or emotionally charged issues, and there's usually multiple perspectives. So really being able to help students understand different perspectives on an issue is key. And to do that, sometimes it's helpful to give the students a forced perspective. In other words, they're not going to come at it from their own point of view. They're going to put on a different hat and come at it from someone else's point of view, which in some ways is sort of a good safety spot for the students, but it's also a way to really get them to open up their minds to looking at different perspectives. It's motivating for students. It's a change of pace. They're going to be someone else, and they're going to communicate with their peers as someone else. It's challenging. It really is about having students dig into text, evidence, find point of view, find bias, and have a rich discussion among themselves. So to do this, it needs to be done with precision. And today we're focusing on a lesson about guns and school safety, and as you well know, this for many students is a really emotionally charged issue for a lot of different reasons, which is all the more important to really know your why, really think about how you're doing, how you're teaching about this and each step of it. So a couple of tips for you. Keep your eye on the prize. We're looking for a really rich discussion. It's not a play with a script, and it's not about acting in costumes. The question that the students are looking at needs to be an open issue. In other words, there's something there to discuss. There's some meat on the bone. Examples of closed issues that really have already been decided are slavery, things about racism, the Holocaust, those sorts of things that have sort of already been decided as either, no, that's just plain wrong, or there's really no other way to go about it. And, be careful not to put kids in an uncomfortable situation where they're playing the role of a victim or a villain. So know your students in your community, and I know you all do. Know how they sort of react to things and what's going on in your community. What can be taught in Los Angeles one day may not be able to be taught so well in another place another day. It kind of depends because current events roll. And definitely avoid having students role play religious rituals or act like other racial or ethnic groups. Just that can really go south on you, and there's usually not much point to it. The last thing is, maybe students don't have to really reveal their own opinions in the end. Really think about why you're teaching the lesson, why are you teaching about current events, and not so much about needing to know how every student in your class feels, particularly on an emotionally charged issue. One of the things we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years with teachers is we've talked about academic discussion, is whether teachers choose to reveal their own points of view, particularly on a controversial issue. You know, that's really up to you as a professional. But one thing that we've come to the conclusion, not just CRF, but all the teachers who we're working with, is really about knowing your why. Figure out why it is that you want to share your point of view with the students and to what benefit it is for you. What benefit is it for students, you know, for their learning? Is there any downside to it? So those are sort of just some tips for you there. There's a few different kinds of role play that CRF provides, and those include moot courts and mock trials. For those of you that aren't like law-related education junkies like our friend Laura Wesley here at CRF is, the difference between a moot court and a mock trial. The moot court is an appellate court, and a mock trial is really usually a criminal or a civil trial. So a moot court has justices and attorneys arguing a point of law, whereas in a trial, there are witnesses, there's a verdict, so you kind of see the difference. Moot courts tend to work very, very well for big issues, and they're very meaty for the students to take on the role of justice or an attorney on one side or the other and really dig deep into an issue. Congressional committees, legislative hearings, all of those kinds of public meetings make for great role plays and simulations. Other types of government or legal bodies, this could be past or present if you want to do something historical, or if you're teaching world history, perhaps from another country other than the United States. And we have a whole library of lessons that use role play and simulation as academic discussion. A lot of them are on current events, but there's also some for world history and US history. And then we also have another method, civil conversation, which we'll talk about later. And before this webinar is over, we're going to tell you the secret place, if you already haven't found it, where all of that treasure trove of stuff is. So I want to introduce you to some outstanding teacher leaders who you will be working with today and beyond. Abo Morgan is a teacher here in Los Angeles. He teaches at Teach Public Schools. And Regina Yount is a fabulous teacher in Statesville, North Carolina, middle school teacher. And Ben Conklin is an amazing teacher and webinar extraordinaire presenter. And he's also from Statesville, North Carolina. And I am going to turn it over to Ben to get into the lesson.
All right, well, thank you, Carrie. Yeah, and today's lesson deals with, of course, a very timely topic, one that, as you stated, is extremely emotionally charged, but an important discussion that our students need to have. Not only is this an issue that they need to understand and learn more about, but they also need to take this as an opportunity to practice the ability to listen to others who might not agree with them and actively engage in a lesson as they're learning and experiencing what might be interactions with others that could easily be hostile outside of school. It's important for students to learn how to handle themselves and learn at the same time. The lessons that CRF offers are perfect for these opportunities. What is the best way forward? Guns and school safety. To highlight a point of importance for us in the classroom, and something that makes these lessons work extremely well, I wanted to talk a moment about the importance of context and our role as providing context for our students. And to do so, I wanted to offer to those online with us today a simple fill-in-the-blank question, and then perhaps have their opinion changed when further context is provided. After the 2008 housing and financial crisis, the Federal Reserve printed trillions of dollars to blank the economy. Take a moment, and as a participant in this webinar, think to yourself, the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, the banker's bank, if you will, and promoted by news agencies as a remedy to do so. I'm seeing across stimulate, boost, rescue. And as shown on the screen, some have said help, to fix, to strengthen, even to boost the economy. And of course, politicians and news anchors would be saying the same. Now I'd like to provide perhaps a little bit more context. As a history teacher, I often find myself doing this in class a lot. Let's fill in the blank again. During World War II, the Nazis printed billions of British pounds to blank the English economy. So during World War II, the Nazis, in an effort to blank the English, were printing billions of British pounds. What are some responses that might come to mind in this context? Weaken, overinflate. The context of the question itself highlights that, Nazis and the British are enemies. So why would the Nazis be trying to boost, help, strengthen the British economy? This highlights the importance of students perhaps taking one stance on an issue, but then just knowing a couple other pieces of information, or of course historical context, could drastically change their opinion. This is the same exact tactic or procedure used by the Federal Reserve as was by the Nazis. Of course, in 2008, the stance was not this Federal Reserve is doing this to hurt, to destroy, to undermine the American economy. The exact opposite was said. So people might go along with that rather easily, but once they have some historical context or some other information, they might have their opinion changed. The lessons that CRF offers provide this opportunity over and over again for students. I find that they take a lot of care to provide a well-balanced approach to providing information that clearly do not serve as trying to direct students to come to a particular outcome or decision. So maybe hurt, undermine, damage, destroy, the exact opposite that we maybe said before. So with you providing context for your class, whether that be historical context or an issue, maybe that's clarifying certain definitions, maybe that's encouraging students to offer their own opinions. That is a key ingredient for this and other CRF lessons to work. But some other ingredients that you'll find in this lesson and others that you have to take careful care to pay attention to are the fact that the resources we're choosing are structured academic controversies, meaning we're providing text to our students that provides many sides, or at least two sides of a particular issue, but there's some kind of intrinsic controversy back and forth where students can take a side. And of course, this offers a particular level of engagement, and students take on a particular role furthering that engagement. Discussion is completed in small groups between 3 and 5 students with most of these CRF lessons, and that allows students to voice their opinions and not be crowded out by a larger group. It also makes it harder for some of them to hide if they might be a little bit hesitant to share their opinions. Once these small groups have their discussions and pointing to the text to verify why they believe what they do, the entire class debriefs and you have a whole class discussion. This is when this teacher can make connections, provide further clarification, and of course, adding to the overall context that we started to try to provide in the beginning. So we thought we would take an opportunity to share a little bit of an abridged version of this current lesson on guns and safety in schools. And to do so, I want you guys to watch a video clip and see if you can piece together the overall structure of this particular lesson. Now, I will say that the video you're about to watch is of kids using this lesson as an extra credit opportunity during their lunch hour. So this is a classroom that doesn't seem to be as normal with kids eating in the background, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So with that little montage, perhaps we were able to piece together the overall structure of that lesson I did with my students. If not, that's okay, because here you're shown exactly how I broke this particular lesson up. Of course, the foundation, the bulwark of this lesson is the article itself provided by CRF. So I chose to read the article, and then the class helped me. Kids took turns individually reading. But ultimately, we read the article together, and they were broken up into groups of 5 legislators who were trying to come together and form some proposals on what specifically could be done to remedy the problem of violence in school shootings. Eventually, one person from each group was chosen by their group to present the overall proposals that the group had come to. So the lesson flow that I chose to use with this particular article was that I introduced the article and provided context. I chose to talk to my class about how in the United States today, overall violent crime is actually at like a 20-year low, but there is a particular crime that has been rising steadily, the crime of mass shootings with guns, particularly in schools. So while all violent crime seems to be going down, why is it this one particular heinous act is increasing dramatically? I provided some further context and tried to make the kids remember anything that they've recently learned about some of the horrible tragedies that have occurred. And then I read the beginning of the article to them. Students volunteered and took turns to read the rest of the article. And then they were given 1 minute to answer they were given 1 minute each for 3 questions. I wanted them to have some kind of thoughts going into their group discussion. So this particular part of the article that you'll see when you read it yourself, I chose to use it very briefly, again, giving them 1 minute. And when 1 minute was over, I told them, and they were finishing that sentence and moved on to the next question. This gave them an idea of what they might talk about and also reinforced what they had just read, forcing them to think about it.
Ben, we have a quick question you may want to address.
Sure.
Biggest pushback I get from my students is this is not a speech class. A high percentage of them would not even present unless I make a requirement. How do you make this happen?
We have the question about how is it that you coax students perhaps into be willing to discuss. They say this is not a public speaking class. They're very hesitant to talk in front of others. This is a barrier that often does have to get broken down. Now, in this particular context, they're invited to have a discussion as a small group and are not required to speak in front of the class. They can, if they want, you could ask every student to participate that way, but that's not how I chose to use this lesson. And I don't do that with all of my lessons by far. There are a couple projects in my class where students are required to speak in front of everyone, but with lessons like this, that is not a requirement. So with this activity, the students read the article, and then the activity itself is broken down into these 4 components. The one that we want to focus on right now is number 3. The students are asked to read the article, and then with that new information, asked to join this committee and discuss policies and decide which policy or a combination of the policies their committee will propose as part of a new legislative bill. They're invited to focus on 4 different areas that the article touches on: expanding funding for school resource officers, information about states funding training for teachers or school staff and active shooter drills, about new gun regulations or, quote, gun control measures, and allowing teachers to carry concealed firearms in schools. Those are the 4 components that the article talks about and does a great job balancing. But then the students are invited to also offer their own policies that are not listed in the article itself. So my students got into their groups of 5. They had 10 minutes to look over which 2 components they wanted to focus on, and then spend the remaining time looking at their specific proposals. Now, in lieu of reading the entire article with us today, I wanted to focus on some of the key pros and cons from each of these 4 categories listed in the 3rd step here. And I want to invite everyone participating, as we go through these pros and cons, type in the text box, share in your chat box, which pro and which con you most identify with. Just choose one of each that you think perhaps you would share if you were a student yourself. Put yourself in the student's role. Imagine you providing this opportunity as a lesson to your students. If you were one of them, which would you choose? So I'm going to go through and read through these categories and invite you to type in the chat box which ones you agree with the most. So school resource officers. The article highlights that supporters of this proposal argue that the decrease in violence at schools since the mid-1990s coincides with an increased presence of SRO officers. They might say that often SROs act as informal counselors and educators at schools where they work, providing an important and expanded role. Critics of this proposal of school resource officers say that they're not responsible for the decline of crime in school, that crime in general has declined since the mid-1990s, and that cases in which SROs have treated misbehaving juveniles as the same as adult offenders, and people worry about juveniles being treated as adults. Many disciplinary problems handled by SROs are better handled by the principal's office. Or perhaps SROs were present on campus in Parkland and Columbine and other schools where tragedies did occur. So add your own or choose one of the ones presented here. Please share with us in the chat box with you as a student or you personally might choose as a pro and a con.
We've got some great responses out there. I'm very impressed with this group and how much that they're just on top of it and responding.
We've had one of these at my school recently, an active shooter drill. This particular article provided by CRF highlights a remedy that many point to. Supporters of active shooter drills say they're intended to prepare students and faculty just like a fire drill. That lockdowns can be an effective way to keep people safe and avoid the chaos. But success depends on training, calmness, and sensitivity of school staff. Critics of active shooter drills say it's better to have a way out or to defend against shooters, and that drills themselves are traumatizing to students. Perhaps you as an educator have experience with an active shooter drill. Please share with us a support and a critical statement of your own or that you find on this list. As you follow along in the chat box, you can see that regardless of what particular perspective you have, you are shared by many with that perspective. A third component that this article and students will come across is gun control itself, laws that would affect the availability of firearms themselves. Disagreement among supports and critics about policies interpretation of the Second Amendment. So proposals, or those who propose policies, include banning automatic weapons, maybe waiting periods to buy guns. We've seen discussion of raising the ownership age to 21, requiring safety locks on guns at all times, and mental health checks for those purchasing or having recently purchased firearms. Some level of agreement about improving mental health services is also part of the discussion. And this article does a good job of highlighting some concern that people have about this gun control issue. And finally, a fourth component that students are presented with, arming teachers and school staff. Supporters of arming teacher and school staff say the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That guns are either concealed or safely locked away so students cannot access them. That teachers can be properly trained by law enforcement, and that it deters potential shooters in the first place. Critics of arming teachers and school staff, as found in this article, say teachers already have enough on their plates. They'll never be able to guarantee the wrong person could get their hands on a gun. And bad lesson for students and society, some kind of dystopia of armed teachers. So as you can see, although this is a short article presented by CRF, it does a great job of some heavy lifting, all kinds of perspectives offered. And not only are they offering these perspectives, but they're doing so in a balanced way. So perhaps you could share your own particular belief, which support and critical statement would you most identify with? You can share that in the chat box. And I wanted to offer up a Q&A. Officially, if anyone has any questions about this particular lesson or how we could modify this lesson to meet the needs of your classroom, if you have any concerns that you could see already some things happening in your class that you want to have addressed, by all means, please ask any questions in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer and help you. But I will say, if you are new at utilizing lessons like this and it doesn't go as well as you hoped it would, good. Good because you tried it. Good that you failed in that sense because you can find opportunity to make it better. If it didn't go as well as you maybe liked, of course, first look and see what you could have done better. I know I'm very critical of myself in the classroom, so I tend to blame myself before the students. But anytime something doesn't go as well as I like, I just take it as an opportunity to refine the lesson. I'm certainly not going to give up on it after just once. Our experience as teacher leaders is that these lessons have done an amazing job engaging students and providing maybe further understanding. So we have some great questions here coming in on the chat. I'm having an issue getting my kids to care, to take a side at least. Anyone else in Maine getting the apathetic attitude towards a major issue? We have to remember that sometimes students like to act like they don't care at first until they see others getting more involved, and they're relatively hesitant, whether it's not seen as cool to have a care or show that you know as much about an issue as you do. It's been my experience that students, when presented with these opportunities more than once, do tend to change their behavior, and they might seem like they don't care at first, but often they secretly do.
I'm going to butt in just for a second, Ben. This is Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Two things on my mind. One is that the discussion board is really great, and it's really interesting that you can see the controversy in this issue just among the discussion among teachers. And you will see the same thing in most classrooms. There will be students who will feel one way or another about the issue. And that's why putting them in the role as legislators instead of this is how I feel, instead they're, well, as a legislator, I believe this, that, and the other for these reasons is super important. The second thing, we saw a question earlier on the discussion board saying the pros and cons aren't in the lesson. They actually are in the lesson. You can see this is the actual lesson that Laura's showing now. And active shooter drills, the pros and cons are within those paragraphs. We just simply made Ben a nice summary of those paragraphs for this purpose. And we can certainly share the slide deck with you so that you have those slides that just very bullet point summarize those paragraphs.
And another thing, this is Sarah, I just want to jump in because I noticed a common theme in a lot of people's comments in the chat, which is that one obvious tweak that you may want to make to this lesson is to adjust some of those policy options or consider those policy options given the state and local laws wherever you're teaching, because many people commented that, in their states they already have certain provisions that maybe we're talking about here or don't. So obviously, make it work for your communities, like we were saying before.
Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, that highlights the point about these lessons, how they're just a great canvas and can easily be tailored to meet the needs of any individual classroom. I love the resources available through CRF because they do afford me the opportunity to take ownership of them in a sense and utilize them as I deem appropriate. I use them in conjunction with other primary source lessons, and I definitely find myself having students engaging with text and then discussing what they had just read and finding more long-lasting learning as a result. yes, students are hesitant to do this at first, and they might think that this is not a short story reading class, a current events only class, a public speaking class, but they soon realize that these are the mechanisms that we use to learn and share information for the rest of our lives. We don't usually write down a paper and hand that into to somebody and communicate that way. That this is much more of a transferable skill set that they're helping cultivate. So we see that there are many other posts in the chat box here. If anyone has any specific questions, Regina would like to point them out, and anyone else moderating can point them out. We'd love to get them answered for you.
All right, someone just asked me, this is a question really close to my own heart as a middle school teacher. And we've had it twice now. Is this appropriate for middle school? Absolutely. I use it very frequently, both role play simulations and civil conversations. All for me in the middle school, it's about choosing articles that I can scaffold or that are appropriate for them and that have multiple roles that they can go back and look at. Another question that came up was, what do you do when there's a shouting match? What do you do when there are, it's not truly a conversation that the students are having. It's not a discussion. And I always refer back at setting the ground rules to begin with, communicating them, and then redirecting them when they're not, especially making sure that they are attaching themselves to opinions from the article, not their personal opinions. They need to get information from the text and cite text evidence.
And me personally, with my students, this is not the type of lesson that I would introduce to them first time. If they haven't had any exposure to these small group discussions about sensitive issues, I might not use this particular topic first. I usually start with more low stakes topics like, is Pokemon Go a good video game for kids to play? We start with small little things and then build up to real important issues, and students at that point have already been trained by me on how to act. If a student does act volatile or really inappropriate and lets their emotions get the better of them, then obviously they're removed from the situation. They're removed from the classroom and they can't participate in that. As a manager of my class, hopefully that stuff is already taken care of before we really get into these types of discussions. There's lots of good stuff coming through on this chat box here. We have a question about sizes of groups. We do really stress that groups are between 3 and 5 students, that they're in small groups. And then once these small groups have their discussions, and for this particular lesson, as their legislative committees formulate their proposals, that only in the small group, once the proposals have been formulated, that the whole class has a discussion about what each individual group had come up with on their own. And whether you're using one of the civil conversation lessons or these role play and simulations, we always stress the importance of using small groups first and then debriefing as an entire class. And when you debrief as an entire class, that's really your opportunity as a teacher to make further connections and provide more context with your students. And you ultimately will find that your conversations lead down avenues that you didn't really intend to go down with in the first place. And one thing I like to do is try to encourage my students to think about these issues in different lenses, so to speak. Let's think about this particular topic economically, socially, culturally, religiously, through technology, politically. We try to break down these issues and look through them through those particular lenses or frames, and it forces them to maybe take different perspectives than they otherwise would have.
Fernando had a question about, would you communicate this topic with parents beforehand? I think this is something that you decide in your local level. Carrie started off with the idea that, we're all individual teachers in a certain area. She gave the example that in Los Angeles, something might be appropriate one day, but not necessarily the next day, depending on what's going on in the news. So if you think that families would be reactive, I would get out in front of it. I think I could do this in my classroom without any extra information for the parents, although I might let them know in our newsletter afterwards that we've had a really good discussion about this, that they may want to check in with their kids I always love to pull the parents in and let them know what we're doing. But I think that would be dependent upon, your kids, and you make that decision based on the students that show up in your desk.
In my civics classes in the beginning of the year, students and parents sign a paper letting them know that controversial issues are discussed and that there's care taken to have a balanced approach with information. And students can choose to not participate in particular lessons if they are not comfortable. But that otherwise there is an expectation that students are willing to hear things that they at first might disagree with. Because I know, like all of you, I tend to learn more from people that actually I disagree with. I don't really learn a whole lot from people that already agree with me on everything. Do you assign roles or do you let them choose? The group dynamics obviously are totally up to you. I let students self-select occasionally. Sometimes I put them in purposeful groups. It really all depends on the goals that I have for that particular lesson. And in my classes, we work towards a very important group project. So I try out different groups leading up to that so I know what personalities work best and try to formulate group dynamics very purposefully. But it all depends on really what you think is appropriate for your students.
For middle school, I always start off with assigned roles at first because it makes them do the reading and it makes them learn the format that I want them to. After they are comfortable and I'm comfortable that they know the format, that I don't have to redirect all the time, and that they are following my guidelines, then I let them choose. But that's much more later in the year. I just find out with middle schoolers, they're kind of emotional at any rate. And so if I start off with those guidelines, they learn the process and the routine, and then I can branch out.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, as someone just commented, that coming up with a perfect solution is not really the goal that students should have in this. The process that they're going through and the skills of reading something, trying to make sense of it, and then share that information with others, that's really what we're trying to cultivate here. And those are skills that translate across any type of job that they have, whether they be in any particular role. Learning things, making sense of it, and sharing that information in a variety of ways is a skill set that we all need to have.
And I wanted to make a quick comment about someone talked about, having a debate about the issue. So I just want to have people just be a little wary about debate, because sometimes when you're debating an issue, you aren't really listening. You're just all about, I want to win this debate. So this is my point of view, and I'm not really trying to come to any understanding. It's just more about winning per se. So be careful about having quote debates when we're talking about these really sensitive issues.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I actually train my students not to use the term debate. We use civil conversation instead, because I feel like with what's going on in the national arena that they have not seen good role models of that, and I'll let them know that I expect them to do a better job.
Good for you, Regina. That's a good answer. Someone earlier in the chat board asked, what's the outcome of the lesson? So the outcome of this particular lesson should be that students were exposed to multiple perspectives on an issue and looked at different policies that are being discussed in the public square. And, they should have developed more of an understanding about the complexity of this issue, not necessarily just making their own decision about this is what I think and this is what should be done, but really gaining an understanding about the complexity of issues in our society, and that there's always more than one point of view. The more serious the issue, the more points of view and adamant points of view there are. Well, I noticed a fifth grade teacher asked if this would be appropriate for fifth grade. That is entirely up to you. In a couple of seconds here, Laura is going to share a curriculum library where there are lessons for those of you wanting a stipend for your participation. You don't have to do this lesson. You can do a lesson that you feel is more in tune with what your students are most interested in, or what you're most comfortable with.
And where you are in the curriculum too.
Yeah, where you're basing it is.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of next steps if you are interested in earning a stipend. I'm going to go, first of all, to the website. And I want to make sure, I'm going to go to the very front. Do you all see on your screen where it says Constitutional Rights Foundation, Civics on Call? If not, oh, great. Perfect. All right. So if you go to crf-usa.org and then go to this box on the very far right bottom where it says Teacher to Teacher, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. You see the third box with the boy right there in front of a sign. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then this is where we have all of the resources if you're interested in maybe doing a lesson. So there's 3 tabs that you would be looking at. One of them is the curriculum library. One is professional development, where we have some recorded webinars. And then the other is the discussion board, which says April 2018. That's this group would be having a discussion on this particular board. So let me go to the curriculum library real quick. This is first tab here. And you'll see that we have 2 different strategies. So we have the civil conversation strategy and the role play and simulation. So the lesson you just saw was a role play and simulation of a legislative committees. And you can see here that we have a bunch of free lessons using role plays and simulations in different categories. World history, here's an example. We have Rome, Republic to Empire. You have a middle school, this is appropriate for middle school or high school. Ending the war to end all wars, which is World War I. And then if you go back up, you'll see current events, guns and school safety, that's the one we just did. What should the U.S. do about North Korea? So there's a ton of different lessons here that you can use to use this strategy in your classroom. I know there was some concern, it's like, well, I already taught, you know, the Second Amendment or the Constitution. Well, maybe there's something else in these lessons that you can use, or maybe you can use this strategy as a review at the end of the year for the students. The second strategy that we kind of referred to or talked about in the chat section is the civil conversation. And what I want to show you is not only do we have a bunch of free lessons on civil conversations, content to support civil conversations, I wanted to actually show you how we get students to have civil conversations. So I'm going to see, I thought it was up here, let's see. I might have to do a new share, but do you happen to see on your screen here where it says conducting a civil conversation in the classroom? Or do you, yes, great. So we have it both in Word and PDF. And really, it's a great way to get students to focus on the content reading that you're providing them. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. The beginning part tells you how to have the civil conversation, how to use the guide with your students. But here's the guide. Students have a content reading that you've provided or that we've provided in the curriculum library. And that reading is really important because obviously it provides the content to the students, but it really provides, you know, at least 2, if not more, perspectives on a particular issue. And so the students are going to read through the article quickly on their own, and then they're going to annotate it the second time through. They might underline the most important points. They might circle words or phrases that might be confusing to them. They might put a question mark in the margin if they have a question about a specific part in the reading. So really having that close reading element so that when they have the discussion, they're not just saying, well, I heard this or I heard that. They're actually referring back to the text when they're having their conversation. So here's the second step then is they're going to start preparing for their discussion. They're going to go back to their text. They're going to talk about, okay, what are some, oh, you are not seeing the lesson plan. I didn't think so. All right, let me go and do a new share. Sorry about that. New share. You should see it now. Yes, 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 great. Okay, so just to go back, this is the lesson plan. Talks about the overview of the objectives, how to use the civil conversation guide with your students, and now we're at the civil conversation guide that you actually give to your students. Section B there is what I was talking about as far as underlining, circling, kind of annotating the text. And step 2 is the part where students are, you know, looking through the text to complete these boxes. So they're going to talk about what the reading's about. They're going to jot down some of the main points. And they're going to talk about, what are some of the things they agree with in this text? What are things that they disagree with? Again, referring back to the text. So when they have this civil conversation, they have some points that they can use. And then they're going to create 2 questions about the reading that they want to have discussed. And step 3 is the actual discussion and listening. So there's going to be some basic rules for the conversation, making sure everyone in their group participating, right? We don't want to have just one person monopolize the conversation. We want all the students in a small group to participate in the conversation. And they must listen carefully to others. They have to ask clarifying questions. And of course, they must be respectful. And then lastly, they must refer to the text to support their ideas. You'll give them an amount of time to have their discussion. And then after the discussion, the students will do kind of a self-reflection, right? So they're going to talk about how they're going to say if they've spoke less than, about the same as, or more than others. They're going to actually tell you how they added to the discussion, because you're actually going to be walking around. You're not going to necessarily be sitting at every discussion. So they'll be able to tell you how they added to it. They'll tell you what evidence they used and what they learned.
And that provides an assessment of how you can assess group discussion without listening in on every single conversation. Ta-da!
Ta-da! Civil conversation in a nutshell. So I'm going to stop this share, and I am going to go back to the website here. Okay, so as you can see, this is, if you want this document, you just can download either a Word version or a PDF. You can see it right here on the right-hand side of your screen under Civil Conversation. That second kind of block paragraph there is where you'll find the Civil Conversation Guide. And then here below it are where you'll find the content readings that you can use that guide with, okay? We also included some pro-con discussions as well, some really good content reading, and
From Newsella.
Newsella as well. So that is the 2 different strategies that we are hoping that you would like to try out and earn a stipend. Let's see here. I want to go back to this tab. Oh, hopefully you can hear me. I want to go back to the tab. And so we were at the curriculum library. I'm just going to show you 2 more places real quickly before I let you go. One is the professional development. And if you want more information about how to use the civil conversation in your classroom, Ben Ben and Regina and Avo did a national webinar on using civil conversation. So they kind of walk you through the entire lesson. I think they are using the lesson on how we judge our nation's founders. It's about whether or not schools should be renamed, who are named after slave owners, and whether or not those schools should be renamed. So this, you can watch this webinar and click here to confirm that you viewed the webinar. And if you still have more questions about how to use the civil conversation, he did another webinar that's just kind of question and answers about using civil conversation strategy with your students. So that is kind of the professional development on civil conversations that you need. Yeah, I think this civil conversation could be used. There is a lot of information in there. You just have to, the kids would have to propose the question, or you would propose the question to students to have the conversation on. Okay, so that is the professional development. Finally, we're going to get to the stipend part. Do you see this tab here? I think it's hopefully highlighted red, and I can't see. No, I don't think I need to reshare because it's on the same application. Where it says discussion April 2018. Go ahead and click. I'm going to go ahead and click on that for you. And this is our discussion board. So really, in order to get your stipend, here's the checklist. You should have attended the live webinar, which you did today, which is fabulous. You're going to watch the recorded webinar on how to use civil conversation. And that's what I showed you on the professional development. And then you're going to use 2 lessons with your students. So you might want to use 2 civil conversation lessons, or you might want to use 2 role plays, or maybe you want to use 1 of each. However you want to do it, that's great, but we want you to be able to use those strategies or strategy, and then we want you to post about it online. Tell us how it went.
So really quickly, I'm seeing a lot of questions that people are trying to click on this link and they're being asked to log in and can't. That's because we haven't enrolled you in the class yet. So I'm going to do that as soon as we get off this webinar, and we'll send you an email telling you what to look for, but you'll be getting an email that will come from Power School Learning. So check your inbox and your spam or junk boxes, and it'll be an invitation to join an invitation to join this course, and it'll give you a link to click on and set up your username, and you'll be able to get right in.
Yeah, and so the discussion board really is just let us know how it went. Here's an example. We want to know, what successes you had using the strategy, maybe challenges. Did it cause you to do anything differently than you normally would have, and what you might do differently trying the strategy next time. So it's really simple. We'll also be having a final webinar on May 30th that's national with everyone who's used these strategies. So hopefully should be relatively large, just sharing how it went with the group. So that's on May 30th.
And just so you know, Regina and Abo, two teacher leaders we introduced at the beginning of the webinar, they monitor the discussion board. And so if you have questions along the way, or you just want to shout out to them. Some of you commented that you wanted, teachers to collaborate with you to do these kinds of activities. Well, you've got Ben and Abo and Regina ready to do that. So don't hesitate once you get the link to reach out to them.
And one way that you can do that is on this, right, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen there, just under the welcome, there's a Q&A page. And we set that up for just any questions that you have about how to use one of the strategies. That's a great way that you can reach your teacher leaders, and also, log in and look at other people's questions and comments, which I think can be really helpful and can be a great way of getting that online collaboration going that some people mentioned.
And then time on May 30th, a lot of people are asking, we're going to go ahead and make sure we send you a follow-up email with everything, but that will take place the same time. So it's 4 o'clock Pacific time, and that would be 7 o'clock Eastern time. And then, so you would try them out, you would post on the discussion board how it went. We'll attend that short webinar on the 30th, and then there's really a brief, just a few-minute survey about your experience with this PD, and then we'll give you stipends in June. There'll be a $200 stipend for all teachers who complete this process. Again, we have a really condensed timelines between now and the end of your school year. So even though we say May 30th, if your school year isn't out until June 15th and you want to do this, the last week of school, feel free. We're not giving you a deadline. You don't have to be done by May 30th. If you need more time, it's not a problem.
So the immediate next step is receiving the email to register for the online class.
Yeah, so that's about it. If you have questions, please put them in the chat section. We will be following up with an email. It'll have a link to everything that we discussed today, probably more information than you want to know, but we'll also include a short PD, just a few questions about how, if you felt this PD was helpful. So we'll make sure that goes out to you as well.
Feel free to say if you did on the chat.
Yeah. But yeah, we will send out a quick survey along with those other materials.
And finally, we want to definitely thank Ben for all the work that he did to prepare, and his outstanding, he's just the webinar guy. He always makes me laugh, but I learned so much from him. And Sheila Smith, who is the executive director at the Barra Education Foundation in Chicago, has been listening in. So just want to shout out to Sheila too.
And then just real quickly, someone had a question from San Diego. They attended another PD in San Diego. I'll get back to you. I think if it was on the same strategies, the role play simulations, it was actually. It was on the moot court, on the Greenwood case. Yes, that's the same stipend. So you can't get a stipend for both that and this. So you can pick one. And I'll follow up with you via email.
Okay, we're going to close out. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and feel free to, oh, I can go to the power. No, I can't.
We'll sit here for a little while just in case you have questions. But everybody else, have a great evening.
And you know where to reach me, at least. I know you guys have all received emails from me, so feel free to drop me a line. And I think I've included Laura's contact information in lots of those emails too. So feel free to check in with either one of us with any questions about next steps or the process.